How's it going, Eliminators? Today we're going to be installing a K&N cold air intake on my new truck. So let's get right into it. So today we're going to be installing a K&N Blackhawk cold air intake onto my 2019 5-liter F150 here. So the first thing we're going to do is come to the airbox here, and we're just going to be pulling back those two clips there. Now there's going to be two connectors on the back of your intake tube here, and what we're going to do is push down on this little tab here, and we can just pull that right off. And on this one here, you're just going to push down on the blue tab and pull that off. Once you get those tubes disconnected, we're going to go ahead and loosen off our clamps, and over here on the intake manifold as well. And then there's going to be a coolant reservoir tube that just pinches in here, so we're just going to go ahead and pop that off. Then we can go ahead and lift up on the top of our airbox, remove that, and it exposes the factory paper air filter. These are no good, guys. They don't filter out much debris at all. So unlike in the small engine world where the OEM filters are superior to the aftermarket ones, in the automotive world, the factory air filters are usually paper, where the aftermarket filters are always a higher quality. Then we're gonna go ahead and remove our intake tube here. So here we have a K&N Blackhawk cold air intake. This is made out of aluminum and it's powder coated black, so it kind of looks like a plastic one, but the plastic cold air intake tube, they had a plastic connection with little brass fittings, and I heard bad reviews that the thread stripped, so I went ahead and got this one because they have welded on fittings and they're similar to the OEM style, just snap-on connectors. We have here one of the best oiled K&N filters on the market. This is a lifetime filter and it is washable and reusable. So the first thing we're going to be doing is installing the air filter adapter to the air filter housing here, and you guys are going to notice there's two holes there. They have two threaded inserts on the back of the adapter. We're simply going to line this up and bolt it on. Now there's going to be two trim pieces. There's going to be a small trim piece and then there's going to be a larger trim piece as well. We're going to start by cutting the small trim piece to two sections that both measure at 9.5 inches long. Now they do provide you with super glue, and we're going to be installing the two, weather stripping on this edge up here and that edge up top. So the length of weather stripping here that they give you, turns out it's not as long as it should be. We cut it at 9.5 inches long, which turned out to be exactly in half, and I would have liked to see them extend this maybe a 1/4 inch on each side, but that's going to be good enough for now. We do have some super glue on there, and we're going ahead to get this one installed up here. Now we're going to be taking the thicker weather stripping, and we're going to be starting at the top right corner with these little tabs on the bottom right side. Now once you get that wrapped all the way around, you should be left with a little bit of overhang, which we're simply just going to trim off. And the corners were a little tricky to get on, but you just have to kind of finagle them on and they should go on. So the next thing we're going to be doing is slipping a hose clamp around our air filter, and then we're going to go ahead and install the air filter onto our air filter adapter inside of the airbox housing. Now this is going to be installed with this side facing the front of the vehicle, so we're going to position the clamp so that I can always get access at it easily, and go ahead and get an 8mm socket, and we'll go ahead and tighten that clamp up. So on the back side of the airbox, or the heat shield, you're going to see these little cutouts here, and they're going to be pressing into these little slots on the back of the air filter lower piece. Fit those in, and then go ahead and secure your clamps. Then we're going to go ahead and install the coupling hose onto the heat shield airbox, and then go ahead and tighten up your clamp. Next up, we're going to be installing the coupling hose onto the throttle body side and securing that with a hose clamp as well. Now once you get this coupling hose on here, you're going to notice that it pushes all the way back and seats up against the back of the throttle body. The problem is it doesn't give you much of a lip. Now just looking at the instructions here, you can see that K&N's instructions shows that it has quite a bit of lip, and it's not quite seated all the way back up against the throttle body. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the coupling hose out slightly so that we can get a little more surface area for the cold air intake, and then go ahead and tighten down your clamp. So now we're ready to install the cold air intake tube. First, we're going to be hooking it up to the adapter on the heat shield, and then we're going to go ahead and hook it up to the throttle body. Now you're going to have to rock this back and forth quite a bit, but eventually you're going to feel it seat into the throttle body adapter. Then you can go ahead and tighten your hose clamps on the throttle body side as well as the air filter side. Now we're ready to plug in the evap connector here, and that should just snap into place just like that. But the crankcase vent tube, the hose won't be big enough. See that? So we're actually kind of stretching it here. So the problem we're having here is that the OEM tube, you guys can see that's got to go there. It's simply not long enough to get on here, and I don't really want to break it. It's going to be pretty close, but the one that K&N supplies us isn't long enough. But we've managed to use the OEM crankcase breather tube. However, the fitting barely went on and it's super tight. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and just get an oil resistant tube that's longer, and then I can go ahead and change this at a later time. But for now, this should be good. Okay, so I'm gonna fast forward a bit here because I wanted to do an update on the OEM positive crankcase vent tube. This tube that Ford supplies here isn't really a hard plastic, but it's not a soft, malleable rubber either. So in order to get that to fit, we did have to take out some of the pre-bent curvature to it to kind of straighten it out and lengthen it a bit more. Now, K&N does supply you with their own tube to replace the factory PCV tube, and in the instructions they specifically say that you may have to use it on some later model vehicles. But you guys are going to notice that the tube they supplied, it just wasn't long enough to make that connection. So I went down to Napa and I ended up picking up a 2-foot piece of the same SAE 30R7 tubing. This stuff is oil and gas resistant because it is venting your crankcase pressure, so there's going to be some oil vapor in there, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But what I'm going to do is take my 90-degree connector here, which goes to the engine. I'm going to loosen that off and I'm going to put it onto the end of my new tubing. So I now have the hose clamp tightened down, and I did that just using a 1/4-inch bit driver. So I'll go ahead and take this tube out to the truck. So as you guys can see, the hose is a little long, but what I'm going to do is go ahead and just plug this connector in for now, and those are just push fit. And you guys can see that I've left the natural curve of the tubing going sort of to the left, and that'll make it a little more natural for this tubing to come up to our PCV on our cold air intake side. So I've kind of eyeballed it best I can. I'm just going to go ahead and cut the tubing here, and we'll make sure we have our clamp on the tubing before we go ahead and plug in our connector. I can now go ahead and plug that in, and our positive crankcase vent is now hooked up and connected on the driver's side. Now this is a 5-liter V8, and because it's a V8, it has 2-cylinder banks. There's going to be a driver's side and a passenger side. Now, if you haven't seen my previous video where we installed the JLT 3.0 oil separator, I will link that in the top right of your screen, as well as in the description down below, so you can check that out. So here's your PCV connection on your passenger side here, and the oil separator goes in between that, and then it routes itself back into the intake manifold, and you'll notice it's after the throttle body. And the positive crankcase vent on the driver's side here goes from the valve cover, and that vents directly into the cold air intake. Now there's quite a bit of oil vapors that go through these PCVs. However, there's a lot less on the driver's side on these 5-liter V8s. So that's why we only installed a passenger side oil separator on this engine here. If you guys are running an EcoBoost, they do recommend that you run both a passenger side and a driver's side oil separator. But for now, that takes care of the positive crankcase vent on the driver's side. And just like that, guys, we now have the K&N Blackhawk cold air intake installed. So we're gonna go out and take this thing for a road test. I've hooked up the GoPro, and I'm gonna get some before and after shots of how this sounds. And then once we come back into the shop, we're just gonna check and realign anything that we need to, because this will rattle and it could misalign slightly. And then with the vehicle outside or in a well-ventilated area, you just wanna start up your truck, let it idle, and listen for any idle surging. Because this K&N cold air intake system utilizes the factory mass airflow sensor, this is known as a non-tunable cold air intake upgrade. So you do not need to upload a tune to your ECU. This should bolt right on and run perfectly fine, and the engine should be capable of making any changes. So that wraps up the installation of the K&N Blackhawk cold air intake on my 2019 F150 with a 5-liter V8. If you guys are interested in hearing what the difference in sound is, I've uploaded a second video just for that. I will link it at the end of the video, as well as in the description down below. Sounds pretty good. That roars a lot more. Yeah, that really woke it up. If you guys enjoyed today's video, think about leaving me a thumbs up. You know, it really helps me out. You can click here to subscribe and click over here to check out the sound difference that K&N cold air intake makes. As always, I upload every single week, so be sure to stop on by next week, check the channel out for new content. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.